Yes,
Good afternoon.
we did.
Yes, yes, I shoveled in some salad. I think I'm okay. That's enough fuel. I'm all right.
This is Ta-Nehisi Coates, who you all know. I'm joining him, Michele Norris. I'm with NPR and founder of the Race Card Project. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that we spend a lot of time talking about in private, via email, when we talk to each other on the phone. We are both parents. We both have teenage kids. And we are both African-American adults who were once children ourselves. So we are now in the position of giving our children this thing called the talk. You know, preparing them for what they need to know when they go out into the world, and kind of doing it in the pluperfect, because we're thinking about all the things that we were told. And we come at this from different perspectives. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think, yeah, from different dimensions. I mean, the thing I was thinking about when I was coming, I believe our sons are the same age.
They're both
But
15.
You have a son and a daughter. And so I think that was like the first thing like that I was wondering about. Like, do you find yourself in conversations? Because I imagine it's a series of conversations, not just one. Are there differences in terms of how you talk to you? Are there things that your daughter needs to worry about, or that your son needs to worry more? Or is it the same sort of general thrust in general?
Well, there are differences, and I should say that I have a stepson also who's 30. And so the talk has changed. I'm amazed at how much what I have to tell my son now is different than what I had to tell Broderick Jr. when he was around this age.
Okay.
So some of the things are the same and some of the things are different, but it's all born out of fear. When my children leave the house, this worry that, will they comport themselves in the right way if they encounter someone in a position of authority who questions them based on who they are. The reality that if my kids go to school here in D.C., they have a rainbow of friends. But when they go to a store, they're the ones that are more likely to be followed in the store. When they go out, if someone is pulled over their driving age, which is frankly terrifying in its own, on its own.
Just the driving.
Just the driving, just the thought of them driving.
Right.
That's
talk about that.
Its own, sort of anxiety right there. But when they do go out, if they're with, when they're behind the wheel of the car, the advice that you give them. And I used to think that the advice was different for my son than it would be for my daughter, but I realized it really is the same. They both have to, have that armor. They both have to learn how to deal with Teflon. They both have to carry with them something that unfortunately many of their friends don't have to carry. And I used to think when they were younger, well, I'm going to have to talk to my sons differently than I talk to my daughter. And I don't think that that's the case.
Wow. No, I think it's interesting, and I think you started off talking about the generational aspect of this, of us having things that our parents said to us, and then things that you have to then say to your kid, and that's sort of compounding. And as you said, I mean, it all boils down to fear. And I was in this session yesterday, at another place that's not important because I'm here talking to you right now. And one of the things that I kept coming back to is the ways in which, and particularly young African Americans, because I think it gets a little easier as you age out, but the ways in which you have to modulate yourself. And so there's a way of modulating yourself when you're talking to police officers, and there's we have talks about that, about how to conduct yourself. In fact, when I was in school, there was a way of modulating yourself, of how you had to conduct yourself in school. And I think one of the most disruptive aspects of it was there was an entirely different way that I had to learn to modulate myself in the neighborhood I grew up in and having to deal with my peers. And there was not much overlap between those two and
Help me understand that.
Well, and I think this is, we had Mayor Landrieu up here earlier, and he said that it was very important that we not lose sight of violence in the neighborhoods. Not just that we not, simply focus on, violence that, we have our cameras on in terms of, when police are acting in ways that they should not, but that the neighborhoods themselves, and I have to say that I concur. And when you live in neighborhoods with high degrees of violence, which also can be traced to, policy issues themselves, you adopt a certain framework. You put, as you said, you put on a kind of armor to shield yourself from violence. One of the things I often try to get at is we see these poses among young African-American youth, and we often construe it as anger, we often construe it as bluster, and there, is an element of bluster, machismo, all this extra stuff to it, but ultimately what it is about, and I can remember because I did it myself, is securing your body. How
Creating
do you make
space,
that?
a safe
Creating
space.
There it is right there. That phrase, safe space. Creating space. You know, there's an entirely, I'm modulating myself, this is an entirely different language I would use right now that, you know, is not appropriate here. But that connotes exactly what I mean.
But that's the pretzel twist that you go through as parents. Because, you know, I was raised in Minnesota. My father was from Birmingham, Alabama. And every time that they sent me to Birmingham, I would get the version of the talk. You know, when you go, carry yourself in a certain way, don't call attention to yourself.
Was this a South-North thing? That's what
yes,
I mean.
Yeah,
So
like
you're
when
going down south.
Going down south,
Yeah,
I told
yeah.
don't look people in the eye.
Right.
I didn't think that in 2015 I would be telling my 15-year-old son, for instance, not to look someone in the eye. I just thought that that would not be necessary. And so the pretzel twist that you go through is we don't presently live in neighborhoods where violence is the same kind of issue, but you want to send your children out into the world so that they know how to roar.
Yeah.
You know, you want them to be confident. You
Yeah.
want them to be able to step up to challenges, and yet at the same time you have to teach them for their own safety.
That's right.
And for your own comfort.
That's right.
How to modulate themselves so that they know, you know, when they can step up and when they can be confident.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when they have to dial it back.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that, in fact, I'm positive that not all the kids that my children attend school with have to do the same thing. I
Yeah.
try to tell them that will teach them that ultimately they will benefit from that because it teaches them a sort of biculturalism.
Yes,
They're
yes,
able
yes.
to,
Almost
you
a
know,
bilingualism.
to move in different spaces in different ways. But, you know, it's really hard for me I was going to tell you my age, but I'm going to stop right there. It's just really hard for me
At this point.
in life, you know, to deal with that. And so it has to be really difficult for a 15 or a 16-year-old to deal with that. And then we have the added dimension of the year that we've lived through.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
our kids have had a year of seeing Black Death on small screens.
Right, right. And this is like a constant. It's just something that happens. And, I mean, you know, in all likelihood will continue to happen. You will continue to see this because the reasons I think that it's happening actually are deeply, deeply rooted. And it's not just a matter of, you know, although this is good, you know, sensitivity training or, you know, all the other sort of solutions that we're talking about in terms of policing, that we have deep, deep sort of policy, you know, parameters and assumptions that we've made in our society. And you see it compounding and coming down here in terms of how individual people have to conduct themselves. You know, I was listening to you talk about, you know, the ways in which you have to talk to your children and their peers at school being different. And I can remember coming here to D.C., and my real first exposure to the white world was I went to work for an alternative newspaper here called the Washington City Paper. And I remember a reporter talking to me about how he'd gotten pulled over for something that, you know, he felt was wrong, and how he had cursed the officer out. I said, and you're here talking to me about it, like without a black eye, nothing like that. Like this is an exchange that happens, and you know, you know, for certain people it does. And that's not to say that, you know, that there are no, you know, white victims of, you know, police misconduct or anything like that. You know what I mean? It's not even clear to me that cursing somebody out is something that you should be doing in the first place. I'm not saying that's appropriate. I'm not condoning that. But what I am saying is, you know, you used this term earlier about creating space, and there are people in our society that don't have to create space. It just exists. It's just a privilege that they sort of inherit, you know?
And we have law enforcement officers in our family.
Yeah.
You know, and I have so much respect for people who do protect and serve the community.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time right now.
Right.
Is what, you know, how do my kids view law enforcement? What is their view of the system of adjudication in this country? And what could it possibly be, given that they have watched, you know, Cities of Rock, that they've watched literally, and this is an important point that I think we all have to consider when we think about young people today, because I think about this a lot. Something happens in the news and I think, okay, how am I going to talk to my kids about it when I get home? Do I present them with the news, which is ridiculous because they've seen it on BuzzFeed already. And, you know, they've already seen it several times. And so I don't even get a chance to filter that. You know, they already have seen someone perish literally in front of their eyes. And I think about that because I go back to Alabama again. And my father had 6 brothers, and they talked about living in the Jim Crow South, and they talked about how people would disappear. You know, they talked about difficult encounters with law enforcement then under Bill Connor's police force. And the one thing they always talked about is how people who actually saw something happen often just weren't right again. You know, it was different when you heard tell of it, but when you actually saw it, it affected you in a sort of in a different way. You had deep tissue bruising, psychological bruising that you didn't get over.
Well, that was the intent, right? I mean, that was, I mean, at that point, at least, that was, I mean, it was, I mean, and I don't want to conflate two things. I don't want to conflate what's going on now and what happened then, but that was, I mean, it was a kind of terrorism. I mean, it was a political act meant to tell you stay in your place, right? I mean, it was supposed to scar people, to discipline people.
But the idea of seeing the violence, but now we see it in such a
and that's the
casual
question,
way.
right,
Yes.
yes.
And that is where there is a conflation. It's not the motive or not the, the two systems, but the idea of seeing things happen to people who look like you.
But, I think, like, let's take intent out of the picture. Let's not, ascribe any sort of intent, because I think actually intent, at least in this moment that we're in, is the wrong way to look at it. But you talk about effect. And you see, whether, the officer should have been prosecuted or not in, say, a case like Eric Garner, it's worth considering what 8, 9, 10-year-old, because that's the age folks are seeing this now, black boy or girl who sees that, what is the message they take away about their police department and their relationship? I think these are like real, this is like a social contract issue. Folks want to feel and should feel protected, by the police. And I wonder about this era. I mean, I don't know that the era is revealing that there's more violence, but the seeing it, I think, as you say, I think it does something to you, and I think it, you say, it didn't make those folks who would see it back then, they weren't right. And I wonder if our relationship to our police officers, who are nothing but the representative of our society, the change is not in there, the representative of our government and state, whether our kids are right after seeing that, whether they have the same whole relationship with the people who are supposed to secure their safety that other people do.
I almost feel like we have to figure out how to interrogate that space that people perhaps have around them, whether it's our children, whether it's other people's children, not just our own, and even the police officers, because right now, in order to process that, and maybe especially police officers, because often their voices are missing in this discussion and this debate because they're not allowed, because there's, cases are under adjudication, they're for all kinds of reasons not able to talk about what it's like right now to be a police officer, at this time in America. But to figure out how to, as journalists, invade that space, as just humans to invade that space and try to understand the impact of all of this. Because I think we get a certain kind of fatigue. It happens so often that it's not shocking anymore.
Yeah, and I think, from the police perspective, I think one of the unfortunate things that we are doing right now, because I think it's important to talk about, how we got here, is we are having police officers adjudicate things that maybe other aspects of the society don't want to deal with. I have talked about this for the past couple of weeks. I'll continue to talk about it, but I watched that young girl in Columbia, South Carolina, be flipped over and dragged across the floor, right? And everybody rightly, rightly, gets angry at the police officer, right? I guess the rightly or wrongly part I wanted to interject there is why did the anger stops there? See, when I watch that video, I see that there's an administrator in the room right there. So, the focus, on the cop, that's kind of easy, and then, as the reporting started, beginning to dribble out, I see that, the United States, or not the United, South Carolina has a criminal law. It's actually a law, a disturbing school law. This is arrestable, and so a society decided at certain points that it was going to criminalize certain behavior, in schools. What do we think that looks like? Can we actually feign shock when you see the actual effect of law? It's not to go too far afield here, but it's very similar to this problem with domestic violence, where people read these police reports, and then video or images come out, and they're horrified by the video. But what did you think this looked like? When you say we're going to use police officers to do work that perhaps in another time, certainly in other communities. We use other institutions to deal with. The effect is that
or other means, that there would be other ways to take a student out of that situation before you called in someone who was wearing a badge with the expectation that they would come down hard on a child.
Yeah, and so we end up in these conversations about police reform. We end up here as we are right now. How do we talk to our kids about this, that sort of thing. But I just wonder. We're having a talk with our kids, but maybe the broader country should have a talk with itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? About how we got here to begin with, you know?
You know, we think about the talk, and it's now become sort of code, as if it's something that happens just once.
That's right, yeah.
Like on Tuesday, on November 12th, at 3 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have the talk.
Right, all African-American families everywhere.
Yeah. But the fact is, it's always going on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's always going on, and people are always passing on things back and forth. By the way, you know, oh, your daughter's about to be able to drive. Make sure that she keeps a copy of her driver's license
Yeah.
in the visor above, you know, the sun visor.
Right.
So that if she's ever pulled over, she can tell the police officer, "Sir, could you please reach into the visor and pull out that copy of my driver's license so she doesn't or he doesn't have to, your son or your daughter doesn't have to like reach for it." You know, people actually pass on information like that.
Yeah. No, and it is, those are the little things, or it sounds a little. Do you know what I mean? But see, we're doing this in a million different little ways. You know, we are doing this we're talking to our children, you know, once they go into the workplace in different ways about how you can construe yourself. Some people can yell, you cannot, you should not, you know, it's different. We are having, you know, several talks, and one of the things that concerns me about this is it is a weight. You know, it's a serious weight, and to have your child and to say, I can't control that. Like, I actually can't, you know, make that okay for you. You are around people, and it's very, very clear that, you know, there is not equality in terms of the weight that you have to carry, and I can't actually change that. I can talk to you about how to cope with it, but I can't really change it.
You know, but I'm an optimist, and I know
we need
that,
some of that.
Well, no, but I am. I truly, sometimes it's what gets me up in the morning,
Yeah.
you know, but I believe that when you push against a weight, it makes you strong. You know, if you spend any time in the gym, you know that if you continue to pick up that 2-pound weight, you know, you're going to have a different result than if you actually push against something that's much stronger than that. And I try to think about that in terms of the messages that I pass on to my kids. And you know, we were asked to talk about how you conduct the talk. How do you talk to your kids? I think the best message, or maybe the thing that we can leave the audience with, is talk to your kids.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what, talk to them, but listen to them also.
Yeah.
Because that's maybe the difference between our generations. In our household, we listened more than we talked back to the authority figures in the household.
It wasn't an option.
But you know, to figure out, especially at this moment where young people are carrying so much right now, the importance of making a space for them to actually talk through what they see.
Right. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you guys so much. I believe you're remaining, and I'm going to go ahead. Okay. All right.
See you soon.
Thank you, guys.